bring it to the notice of the lawyer or the courts, etc. But it is, and the legislature in a state of suspended animation such as ourselves, we do not know in what state, and Justice Satosh Hegde spoke about the surrender of the executive to the legislature, to the cabinet, of all powers, and now we do not have a cabinet at all. So there is an executive which has, in the words of learned, eminent persons, given up the ability to act independently and given it to the cabinet, and the situation, political situation occurs where the cabinet itself is non-existent. Lawyers cannot be silent, and it is, I'm not speaking about playing a political role, but what I am speaking of is continuing to meet the needs of society as expressed through our laws and the Constitution, of the different rights that are bestowed on the citizens. An extreme example, of course, is Pakistan, our own neighbor. We cannot ignore the fact that it was lawyers, at the end of the day, we may disagree fundamentally on several things, but it was lawyers who almost resurrected a sense of a legal system. I will end with one quotation from Professor Julius Stone. In a democratic polity, lawyers are committed to preserve and advance the indispensable and enlightened cooperation in the maintenance of fundamental democratic processes and forms which free government depends. And finally, from Upen Bakshi, he says, the rule of law is desirous everywhere, and it's constantly a contest between people's struggles to make power accountable, governance just, and state ethical. I will leave the rest for consideration. Thank you.
Dr. J.S. Patil to deliver the presidential remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, we had two excellent presentations. This third technical session, one by Justice Shiv Shankar Bhatt, on the role of judges in the democratization of lawmaking process, and the other by Shreya Jayasinghe on the role of lawyers in the lawmaking process. These are two eminent speakers who have made a very nice presentation. I have nothing to add upon it. And coming to a few of the points that have been missed out, I would like to just add on for the benefit of the audience over here, and then because of the magnitude, the importance of the topic that is there, and it's just a whole lot of things, you know, the role of the judiciary, the role of the judges in the lawmaking process, when there was a kind of a movement of natural law, dictator right reason kind of a process. Much before John Locke, Chief Justice Coke made a sharp reaction to this kind of a natural law philosophy that the law is not just the dictate of a right reason, but it is the artificial reason gotten by the artificial craftsmanship of the judicial people. That is the way in which the reaction comes from the Chief Justice Coke, and that is how a role of the judges in making the laws has been epitomized. And then later on, you know, there are kind of two theories that have been developed in England. Declaratory theory saying that there is no question of judges making any sort of a law, they have only declared law existing, and there is another theory which is constitutive theory, they say that the law is in fact made by the judges, it is the judges who really make the law. It is a kind of a situation. And then even in the common law jurisprudence, there has been a terrific confusion. London Street Tramways versus London County Council is the epoch-making kind of a judgment wherein the House of Lords bettered themselves by declaring that they are bound by their own previous decisions. It almost took 100 years in 1966 when they issued a policy statement after making a terrific, you know, negotiations among themselves, and then unfettered themselves by saying that we are no longer bound by our own previous decisions, and then said under certain compelling circumstances wherein we have to make again a law, creativity, and bring in a new dimension into the law, we have to bring in that kind of situation and assume to themselves the dynamic role of creating new legislation, even much against the chagrin of their own judgment and their own earlier forefathers in the situation. And I have already made a reference in an earlier session as to how the American and Scandinavian realists, including British realists, about which Justice Butt has made a reference, has been there, and they assumed the role of, you know, the kind of the lawmaking to themselves, and in the kind of these are all the kinds of judicial lawmaking that happens, the role of the judges in the lawmaking in a formal legal system. But again, I want to go back to the informal social control systems that operate in the society, wherein the kinds of what you used to call as panchas as Parameshwar, and these are the panchas who used to do the lot of law is made by these panchas, and that is why we are reincarnating that system in what we call as Nyaya Panchayats in these days, and ADR is coming in a big way in that kind of a lawmaking process, and this is the way in which a whole lot of new law is being brought to the fore, and this is the way in which a lot of law has been eminently brought about by the elderly gentlemen of the rural village. And then coming to the other aspect of the role of lawyers, you should remember that under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, the whole lot of team of lawyers who brought in that kind of a new revolution using the eternal principles of the truth and ahimsa. Independence is brought to this country. What kind of a role model you will have then? These kinds of lawyers who have put up a new system of governance to ourselves, who have been languishing under the foreign rulership for such a long time, and this is a kind of a tremendously eminent role that can be played by lawyers as well, and this is the way in which judges and lawyers have an eminent role to play in whether it is a formal lawmaking system or an informal social control system, and I think they should be given their due credit for in the whole mechanism of lawmaking process. And we really come to the end of the third technical session, and I profusely thank my friend Mr. Dakshinamurthy and Professor Hanmant Rayappa for giving me this wonderful opportunity of chairing this session. Thank you very much.
To present a bouquet and a memento to Honorable Mr. Justice Shiv Shankar Bhatt. I request Dr. T.R. Subramanya to present the bouquet and memento to Shri Shreyas Jaisinha. I request Dr. Suresh Nadgada, sir, to present the bouquet to our chairman of the third technical session, Dr. J.S. Patil. With that, we come to the end of the third technical session. We will commence with the fourth technical session in 5 minutes. The chairman of this session is Shri G. Dakshinamurthy. He is the former Secretary of Law and Parliamentary Reforms. He is currently the Director of KILPAR, Karnataka Institute of Law and Parliamentary Reforms, and has been working as Secretary in the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs for several years. He has been instrumental in bringing about many parliamentary reforms, and he has sponsored many programs like the present seminar. Welcome, sir.
Also with us for the present session is Dr. C. Rajshekhar. He is currently the Professor and Dean Faculty of Law in Karnataka University, Dharwad. He is widely known for his knowledge in constitutional law and has several research publications to his credit. He has been working as a lecturer, reader, and professor in the same department for over 2 decades now. Sir, we are pleased to have you with us.
We also have on the dais Dr. K.R. Aital. He is currently Professor of University of Karnataka, Dharwad. He has several publications.
Respected chairperson of this session, Sri K. Dakshinamurthy, the other dignitaries, Dr. Hanmant Rayappa, Dr. J.S. Patil, Dr. Ishwar Bhatt, and other delegates. The topic which is assigned to me is about the role of individual legislators in lawmaking process. As we all know, it is since 60 years India got our independence. We got our independence after a long drawn battle with our alien rulers. We were never truly speaking independent in the past. Only in 1947 we can say that we got a sort of true independence, because for the first time democracy was issued into India. The democracy was never a way of life in India. It is implanted in the Indian soil in the year 1947. When India got independence, many expressed doubts whether Indians could rule themselves. Even Winston Churchill, if we quote his statement about this, it amounts to sacrilege. No Indian would like to hear such a harsh words about us. The gist of his statement is that the Indians cannot rule themselves. They cannot be a worthy rulers. In due course, the governance will pass on to the worst people, the bad people. And when we look back and we observe what is happening around us, we are helpless to accept the statement of Churchill, how prophetic his words are. Though soon after independence, we promulgated our own constitution, which is considered as the best constitution in the world. Everybody thought when this constitution was promulgated under the guidance of men of vision, intellect, commitment to welfare, that India would be guided to progress smoothly under this constitution. But look what has happened. Regarding this, I want to quote a statement of N.A. Palkhiwala, which sums up our position, the present position. I quote, "The Indian democracy has reached its nadir because in our average politician we have the sordid amalgam of lack of intellect with lack of character and lack of knowledge. We have a bunch of leaders who lack knowledge, who lack intellect, who lack character. They are all self-centered leaders. And these persons we are electing to our legislatures, both at the center as well as at the state level. As a result, more and more persons are withdrawing. Majority of the population is withdrawing from the electoral process, from our political process. Today morning, Justice Santosh Hegde rightly pointed out that only a small percentage of the population are participating in the electoral process. And when a leader, a legislator is elected by a minuscule of the population in the constituency, how can these representatives can be considered as true representatives of the people? According to the statistics available, which Arun Shourie has, referred to, if a leader, we have reached a stage where if a leader is able to muster the support of 5 to 10% of the population, then he would be elected. So in order to be elected to either to the parliament or the state legislature, a candidate need to have the support of only 5 to 10%. That means he has been rejected by 90% of the population. We are being ruled by rejected legislators. As I already told you, more and more persons are getting illusioned with our political process, our electoral process. How to rev up our electoral process, to strengthen our democracy. Unless we drag the people into the political process, we cannot strengthen our democracy. If we don't strengthen our democracy, it will definitely spell disaster to the welfare of the society. How to bring a person who does not want to vote? My suggestion is that voting should be made compulsory. Voting should be made compulsory, and if a person does not want to cast his vote in favor of any of the candidates, let him have a space where he can, exercise his option. No preference. Let him, put his mark against no preference. Let us see how many electors do not want to elect the candidates who are contesting the election. So that is one thing. And Arun Shourie opines that the politicians have a self-interest in having a narrow representation. A politician is not interested in getting large-scale support from the population. It serves his purpose if less number of voters, participate in the electoral process, because he need to control only 5 to 10% of the population. That population may belong to a particular caste, particular region, particular category. He can use them as his vote bank. If he can take care of that small percentage of the population, then definitely he will get elected. So, here Arun Shourie states, let me quote a statement by Arun Shourie. He says, so splintered is the electorate by now that there is hardly a national issue on which it is excised. Fragmentation of electorates has been found to be highly rewarding by political leaders as their chance of winning seats is brightened. Arun Shourie asks, what could be a greater inducement to a leader to fragment the electorate? To address his appeal to narrower and narrower sections, to drill into them divisive notions that they are different from the rest, that they are being discriminated against by the rest, and that the rest are out to grab the little that is left with them. Such a self-serving perspective would definitely spell, as I said, disaster to our democratic system. That's it. That is about electoral process. Then, what about the legislative process? How are our legislatures are functioning? How are our legislators are behaving? As we, see them in action in our, TVs, it is very shameful on the part of the legislators, and we are feeling sorry for having elected these persons as our leaders. They have, stooped to such an abysmally low level. They have forgotten everything about the dignity and decorum of the houses to which they are elected. Capturing power, grabbing power by hook or crook has become their obsession. Here, the legislators, by and large, majority of the legislators are losing their interest in the business, which is their main business, that is legislative business. Arun Shourie cites C.V. Madhukar, a person who has conducted a lot of research into the behavior of the legislators. Madhukar writes, I quote, First, the legislature of states and now the parliament are in such a disarray that they cannot deliver accountability at all. Bills are passed without meaningful discussion. Even budgets are passed amidst chaos. He continues, Parliament has passed 58 or so bills per year during the last 6 years. Over the past 7 sessions of the Parliament, the time spent on debating legislative issues was approximately 20% in Lok Sabha, 23% in the Rajya Sabha, and in 2006, in the Parliament, 40% of the bills were passed in the Lok Sabha with less than 1 hour of debate. Today morning, Santosh Hegde as well as CS Patil were referring to this phenomenon of disinterest in the legislators in their main job of law making. I don't say that law making is the only function of the legislators. In modern times, every legislature, for example, our parliament has several duties to discharge, functions to discharge. Controlling public finance, controlling the executive, ensuring accountability, debating, discussing matters of public importance, and lawmaking. But lawmaking cannot be assigned just 20% of their time. And with such less time at their disposal for making law, if they transact, what kind of laws we can expect from them? And Justice Santosh Hegde was right in when he said that we should think whether we should have a minimum time fixed for the passing of a bill. So if a bill can be passed, as H.K. Patil was telling, in a short span of time, definitely we are not going to have well-considered laws. And the task of the judges becomes very difficult to interpret those laws. That is one thing. Next, attendance of the MPs, attendance of the members of the parliament. This is another serious matter. As it is, they are not interested in their main job as legislators. As a result, more and more MPs are shying away from the parliament. They will just make their appearance